Introduction. This video presents the text of a blog post on the website Libcom by Mèo Mun, self-described as, quote, a Vietnamese anarchist collective working to make anarchist ideas and writing more accessible to Vietnamese speakers and provide an analysis of social struggles from a Vietnamese anarchist perspective, end quote. The purpose of this video is to make Mèo Mun's work more accessible to others and bring broader attention to their blog. You can also follow them on Twitter. See the video description for their social media links. This helps establish some context for Mèo Mun's blog post, which I will now read. From this point, everything I say is a direct quotation of the blog post. There will be no personal commentary from me. That belongs in a different video. Is queerphobia in Vietnam a mere product of colonialism, and does it matter? Content warning. Queerphobia, queerphobic slurs, discussion of genocide. There is a tendency in some post-colonial societies to blame all social ailments, such as queerphobia, sexism, and misogyny, on colonialism and Western imperialism. Whilst the evils and destructiveness of colonialism are indubitably pervasive, such reductive thinking is overly simplistic and can be detrimental to marginalized groups in post-colonial societies. Let's explore this in the context of gender and sexuality liberation in modern Vietnam. Some Vietnamese claim that homophobia is solely a product of French colonialism, often citing the fact that the Vietnamese equivalents of the F word, bê originated from the French pédéraste. But is it truly the case that Vietnamese society was free of queerphobia before French colonization? And for those fighting for liberation today, does it matter? Pre-French colonialization, Vietnam was under the influence of Confucianism, which became the prominent ideology during the Lê dynasty, 15th to 18th century. An ideology that upholds patriarchy and places the burden of preserving the bloodline on men will necessarily come with a certain degree of homophobia. Historical records speak of Prince Lê Duân, 1482 to 1512, whose preference to dress in women's clothing cost them the favor of King Lê Hinh Dong, 1461 to 1504, and subsequently the throne. To this day, many still attack queer folk using Confucian teachings. This is, of course, a logical fallacy appealing to tradition. It should be rejected wholeheartedly. In the olden days, Confucianism was used to justify the divine right of kings. Today, we cannot let violence against marginalized groups be justified in the name of culture, religion, and tradition. In modern parlance, bigots often combine this with an appeal to nature, where they cherry-pick a slice of life from the animal kingdom and apply it to humans, ignoring the fact that homosexual behavior, not necessarily sex, has been documented in hundreds of species. Nowadays, some groups among the Vietnamese LGBTQIA+ community are beginning to expropriate queerphobic slurs for use in safe spaces. ZDOI EBD Jolly Cafe, the Bong Fellow, are a few prominent examples. However, the process of reclaiming slurs is complex and emotional for the targeted groups, and queer peoples expropriating certain slurs is not a green light for non-queer people to use those slurs at will. As progress for LGBTQIA+ rights improves in Vietnam, so does the reactionary backlash against it. Queerphobes, such as those amongst nationalist and red pill groups, are also evolving their vocabulary. Let's have a quick Vietnamese lesson on a few common slurs thrown around by young Vietnamese. Lang Gom Bat Chang, or its short form, Lang Gom. Lang Gom Bat Chan is a town of pottery makers in the outskirts of Hanoi, which has the misfortune of sharing the same initial with the term LGBT. In the beginning, it was used as a way to avoid automatic content filtering, but has since become a fully fledged slur. LGTV. The Vietnamese language is pretty malleable, and the initials for a name of a TV brand are close enough to Lang Gom. People would come to queer spaces and post this intentional misspelling of LGBT as thinly veiled aggression. Bang. Yes, another slur. On screen now is a popular remixed Doraemon panel where it's implied that queer folks, Bong, are somehow inferior subhumans. The view is that queer people should be content with the status quo and should not be so arrogant when demanding their rights. To these reactionaries, the mere acknowledgement of queer existence is unfathomable, and any further attempt at liberation is perceived as supremacy to be resisted at all cost. Tho da. The Vietnamese phrase for cholera sounds almost similar to gang da, leftists, and hence also used as a slur. Gender and Sexuality Equality Initiative often comes from liberal, pro-democracy NGOs and is looked upon with suspicion by Vietnamese nationalists. Nhúc na là tan gì quế gong. Why do some Vietnamese often drop this seemingly random statement, Nhúc na là tan gì quế gong, meaning Russia is the last bastion, when discussing same-sex marriage? It is a dog whistle referring to Russia's restrictive policies toward queer people, and they don't mean it as a bastion against the Nazi, but queer people. More often than not, this rhetoric leads people down the vile path to fascism. Nowhere is this clearer than in Vietnam's small but rapidly expanding Red Pill movement. In a private Red Pill Discord server, the members nonchalantly discuss gassing the gays with Zyklon. That's horrifying, yet not surprising of Red Pillers. Alarmingly, many Gen Zs in Vietnam today would tell you that they know at least one friend or family member who is familiar with or interested in Red Pill ideas. Another reactionary force is the Nationalists, who are much more diverse and numerous, with similar attitudes towards queer people. Recently, a 9th grade high school student rightfully pointed out in a TikTok video that Vietnam's Giáo dục Công dân, citizen education textbook, is homophobic because it says, quote, "The state does not recognize marriages between persons of the same sex," end quote. For this simple observation, she immediately got dogpiled. One of the reasons Vietnamese nationalists are against same-sex marriage is that they view young people as the engine of economic growth, and thus are horrified of losing that population makeup due to queer people's not making babies. Nationalists would prefer to keep same-sex marriage in the limbo between not being criminalized but still unrecognized for the sake of the economy. There are two logical fallacies in their argument: appeal to law and appeal to nature. Economic development should not depend on the exploitation of young people. As anarchists, we recognize that the institution of marriage is deeply rooted in the exploitation and economic oppression of women, but at the moment, the legislation of same-sex marriage is vital, for it will afford queer people life-altering rights related to insurance benefits, inheritance, and medical emergency. In another recent incident, a group of high school students performed a dance on the 90th birth date of the Ho Chi Minh Communist Youth Union. They faced so much vitriol from Vietnamese nationalists that they had to take the video down. Their sin? Waving and saluting to the rainbow flag on stage. Nationalists claimed that these students had violated the solemnity of the occasion, that flying the rainbow flag next to the national flag, next to Ho Chi Minh himself, was a blasphemy worthy of harassing minors. In both instances, the dogpiling was initiated or amplified by nationalist groups with hundreds of thousands of followers. Of all the affiliated organizations in Vietnam, the Ho Chi Minh Communist Youth Union should be the ones leading the charge in youth liberation, as well as gender and sexuality liberation, yet they did not defend these children in any meaningful ways. If you cannot fly a flag that represents your gender, sexuality, and humanity in a revolution, is that revolution worth fighting for? To blame all social ills on colonialism and Western imperialism is not at all productive and helps perpetuate the myth of the noble savage. Queerphobia had existed in Vietnamese society long before French colonization and is gravely harming Vietnamese queer people today. It is tempting to rid ourselves of responsibility and blame all problems on our oppressors, but by doing so, we will inevitably victimize the most vulnerable, the most marginalized of us. A large part of autonomy is responsibility, and present-day Vietnam needs to account for the many hardships with which its queer people are faced. Any vision of anarchy or a communist society is incomplete without taking into account all oppressed groups. Finally, I'd like to thank my generous patrons: Dusty Bob, The Boots Are On, Elias Asvig, Juran Barnett, Alexander Curzon, Sean A. Young, Andy Chaos, TVLTP, Thors, Fake Name, Niels Rethelin, Judge Sabo, Matthew Simmerall, Martin T., Ben Lindquist, John Larkin, Jack C., Ezekiel Stacy, Love You More, Noah French, and Aaron Johnson. Please contact me if I ever pronounce your name incorrectly.